Good Vach Shua Tov. We're continuing learning Mesilas Yesharim, the path of the just, and we're in the middle of chapter 13, which is about Precious spiritual abstinence. And we use the Art Scroll edition, and we are on page 280. If you have that edition, you want to follow along. Okay. So we're learning the chapter about Precious spiritual abstinence. Since our goal in life, a Jew's goal in life, is to serve Hashem, and his goal should be spiritual in nature, not physical and not materialistic. We learned that a Jew doesn't have to be limited to only follow what the Torah says, but in certain areas it's actually appropriate for a Jewish person to abstain from certain activities which are allowed because they might lead a person away from serving Hashem and away from leading a Torah life. And it's very appropriate that we're studying this chapter right after Hanukkah, because on Hanukkah the Jewish people rededicated themselves to their spiritual goals. That's the fight that they had with the Greeks. The Greeks believed that the purpose of life was materialistic in nature, and they lived life to just enhance their own lives, to enhance their own power, and enhance their own physical satisfaction. They didn't care about the spiritual. They didn't believe in God. But Jews rejected that, and that's why we fought back. We believe that the purpose of life is to serve Hashem, is to learn how to be selfless people, to follow the Torah, to care about somebody else, right? And it's a whole different outlook on life. If you view life as a Greek, then when you walk down the street and you see something on the ground, you say, "Oh, look, finders keepers, awesome! Look what I got." But if you live your life with a Torah mindset, you say, "Oh, does God want me to return this object to somebody? Someone lost this. Let me care about the other person." And you don't just take it for yourself and look at it as benefiting yourself. Someone just told me right before Shabbos that they lost, I think their book bag with their tefillin in it and some valuable items, and a Orthodox Jewish person returned it to them very quickly. Mika Amcha Yisrael, always like the Jewish people. It's a big Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name when we live according to the Torah. So our goals in life are spiritual. So that means that we have a Torah of the things we have to do. And then there are things that if a person can even grow beyond that and even dedicate his life more to spirituality. So let's learn more about that. Hatil v'hadibor im eina b'dvar iser v'adei din Torah muterhu. Certain things, just like going on a trip or speaking, if they don't contain things which are forbidden, then for sure they're allowed. Amnam kama bittul Torah nimshach menu. However, how much neglect of Torah studies comes from it? Like the Ramchal mentioned earlier, that certain activities are inherently totally fine. There's nothing wrong with them, but if one engages in them too much, they will distract from mitzvos and distract from the proper way of life. We talked about eating. If the food is kosher, there's no prohibition of eating the food, but still, if one is focused and has eating as a goal in his life, that will eventually lead him to violate Torah prohibition. So here too, speech, just talking to somebody, there's no prohibition in just talking, right? If it's not lashon hara or if you're not hurting somebody with your speech. But still, if one just engages in talking all day, then he is wasting time from his Torah studies. Kama min lashon hara, kama min hashkarim, kama min leitzanis, va'omer b'ro dvarim lo yachtal pesha. So, somebody who talks a lot, though, will eventually, he's going to lead to, even though technically talking, there's no prohibition of talking, but it'll eventually lead him to neglecting his Torah studies. He'll end up speaking lashon hara, he'll be gossiping about people, and he will end up speaking things that are not true, and he'll engage in leitzanis. Leitzanis is when people sit around mocking things which are of a serious nature. People sit around mocking Torah scholars, they mock the Torah, make fun of it, and they just say, "Oh, what's the problem? You can't take a joke." But these things are actually very big prohibitions, just to mock serious things. And that, so he quotes the pasuk that in a lot of words, there will be a sin. Basically, someone who's always talking eventually is going to sin with his speech. Says the pasuk. Klal davar. This is the principle. Since everything in the world is really a danger, how could we not praise somebody who distances himself, as the Ramchal, from these things? As the Ramchal wrote earlier, if a person doesn't have direction in life, spiritual direction, it's like he's walking on a precipice and he's in danger of falling over. Like he's a blind person walking on a precipice. He is going to fall into the abyss if he doesn't have a spiritual path to guide him. So if a person therefore everything in this world really has the potential to cause a person spiritual harm. So who wouldn't be praised for wanting to avoid those dangers? Zehu inyuna prishus hatov. This is the good prishus, because the Ramchal talked about earlier that we didn't explain the bad prishus yet, but certain times when a person abstains from certain physical pleasures, it's a good thing, and certain times it's a bad thing. So what's the good prishus? What's the good abstinence? That's when a person abstains from even physical pleasures or certain earthly things which are allowed, but they might lead him to sin. And we talked about more of those examples in previous weeks. There are certain people, and the most praiseworthy of these people, they only use the physical world for what they need to survive. Like I think I mentioned before, my Rosh Yeshiva said about Rav Aaron Leib Steinman that his body was just like almost like his horse. Like he was totally detached on a spiritual plane. He barely ate, and his total focus was just on spiritual growth and spirituality, where he ate because he had to, not because he wanted to, right? We go to a nice restaurant, we enjoy ourselves. He just ate the bare minimum to sustain himself. But again, that's a very lofty level, and a person shouldn't jump to that high level. But from years and years of working on himself, he got to that very high spiritual level. Right? And this is what we praised Rebbe with. He did not with the statement of the sages praising Rebbe, that he didn't even gain enjoyment from this world from his small finger. Now, the reason that was so significant is because Rebbe was a very wealthy person. And even though he was so wealthy, he only used his wealth to serve Hashem. He didn't gain any personal enjoyment from it. He just did what he had to do because of his position. Like our sages say, there are two nations in your stomach. Rebbe v'Antoninus. This is Rebbe and Antoninus. They always had on their table lettuce and cucumbers, I guess like fancy back in the day, radishes, and the whole year they had these things. And nevertheless, even though they were so wealthy, even though Rebbe was so wealthy, he didn't gain personal enjoyment from it. The Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda, we mentioned a similar thing about Chizkiyahu. He was a king, the king of the Jewish people, and he was actually mocked for not engaging in more physicality and having more physical pleasures. Right? Think about today's, certain religious leaders and certain kings and leaders of countries. That's all they do, is that they just enjoy physical pleasure. But the really holy people that are very spiritual, in tune with their spirituality, they only use the physical world in order to serve Hashem. They don't use their position at all to just gain physical pleasures. So based on all these Maimarim and all the things that we said earlier, they all teach us that the praiseworthy thing to do is to abstain from these physical pleasures, because they might lead a person into a great danger of sinning. Now, again, it's very important anytime we study these topics that a person has to know where he is on spiritually, where he is on his particular spiritual level. Everyone should have a rabbi, a mentor that they speak with, and see what areas they can improve on, right? I don't think we should just start all of a sudden, eating a slice of bread and water every day and say that we're very holy people. That would be dangerous for most people to do that, and it wouldn't last. But, taking it on a different level to just not overindulge. That's a good step. Not overindulging in physical pleasures, and working that it shouldn't be a goal in our lives. That the goal in our lives shouldn't just be to accrue more wealth, to find different ways that we can enjoy ourselves physically, but to limit that and make the goal. When the goal in our life is spiritual, then everything else will fall into place. And if anyone wants to talk more on this topic, please feel free to get in touch, and hope everyone has a beautiful week.